All right, we are here, episode 1, Coates Curriculum, and this is Fundamental Conversations of the Coates Curriculum with my first guest, Dr. Nandor Bajusz. Welcome.
Hello, fantastic to be here.
Good. And I think the main premise, the goal behind this is to create open conversation, open dialogue for listeners and viewers, rather than wasting time watching YouTube videos or mundane stuff, music. We can be on the treadmill or on a drive to and from work and just listen to some stimulating conversation. So that's the goal.
Well, except, of course, it's important to understand that some people may not find this very interesting.
Right.
And they'd rather listen to music, watch videos, and so on and so forth.
Sure.
So technically, this is really for those who have this interest in what we're going to be talking about today, because I find it not only fascinating, but super important and fundamental to everyone's success when it comes to health. So, I mean, who doesn't want to know about that? The only question that will remain after we talk about this is, are these two guys right or are they wrong? Because there are other experts who are saying similar but other things. Right. So what we're doing really ultimately is explaining to you how we run our practice, the successes that we've seen. And it's up to you to take this information and then look it up for yourself, look up other experts who are saying other things or different things, and then come to your own conclusions. Because ultimately, the best diet, as simple as this answer seems, is the one that's best for you.
Right.
However, you could say, hey, I want to be a hockey goalie. Okay, so go out in the ice and do it. So you go out and do it and you struggle, or you can have somebody who's had experience in this explain to you how to go about doing some things based on their experience. So yes, whatever works best for you. However, we do believe there's a fundamental starting point that I think most people really should start from and then move out from there.
Perfect. So that actually can be our segue into a brief introduction to who you are and what makes you an expert. We know that you are a gut-friendly expert and a gut health expert, practicing clinical nutrition and functional medicine for many, many years. So why don't you just tell the viewers and the listeners kind of who you are and what you do?
Okay, so interestingly enough, out of this office, I've been here for 20 years, but I've been doing this for a little over 22. And as Brandon said, what I really practice is what's called functional medicine. So fortunately, functional medicine today is much better understood. It's really the medical community and chiros and PhDs and DOs and so forth go to study when they want to study science-based, evidence-based natural medicine. So I started studying this back in '96, and I was very, very fortunate enough to have some incredible mentors. One of those being the great Dr. Bob Rakowski. And anybody's always only going to be as good at whatever it is that they're trying to be good at as their teacher. And he was phenomenal. He taught us very early on, it all stems from the gut, and you've got to go after the gut, heal the gut, live a gut-friendly lifestyle ultimately, because you're either healing the gut with what you eat, drink, think, feel, do, meditate, exercise, all that stuff, or you are harming it. So it's important to know how to go about doing this on a daily basis, how to go about healing, ultimately living a lifestyle that's healing to your gut. Now, the question really remains is, how accurate is this information? Well, so I wrote my master's thesis on this 19 years ago, and I've known about this for a long time, and over the years, countless people would come in and say to me, wow, 50%, if not more, of this information I've never heard before. And that's because other clinicians out there were not trained in functional medicine. As a result, they were really not coming from a gut perspective. But today, I think that's much, much more prevalent. People are understanding, to whatever extent, certainly more than they did 20 years ago, the importance of gut health. So in my mind, I actually believe I coined the term gut-friendly lifestyle. So I've been teaching, regardless of what the problem is when somebody comes to see me, I don't do blood work anymore. I used to do bright field microscopy out of my office. Used to look at blood work all the time that people would bring in. But I concluded one very simple thing. If the person coming to see me, I would ask one question: are you living a gut-friendly lifestyle? And they would say, I don't know what that is. All right, then we can look at your blood work, but I can pretty much tell you what it's going to look like.
Right.
And we pretty much know what your blood work is going to look like if you, do it through OHIP and through your MD. Things may show there, may not, because they're really looking for clinical illnesses, but for sure, your bright field microscopy is not going to look great. So instead of doing all these diagnostics, let's understand you're not doing what needs to be done. As a result, you can't possibly be at the level of health that you would like to be. So the next step is to learn what it means to live a gut-friendly lifestyle. And that's what functional medicine all boiled down to me, was understanding this very simple fundamental thing. And yes, there's a lot more to it, of course, but if you're going to build a house, regardless of the size of the house, how fancy, how schmancy, the most important aspect is dig the hole and lay the foundation. And that's what everybody needs to learn. Once you lay that, you can definitely put stuff over top. So understanding what it means to live a gut-friendly lifestyle is basically what I teach everybody who comes to see me, and it always works, every case. In other words, people always get better. There are outliers who really struggle because the basics are not enough for them, and we just keep adding to the protocol until they get to a point that works, whatever it is that they were missing. But regardless, even those outliers, we have to have them starting with the basics. If you don't have the basics right, then...
Yeah. Just going back to your thesis that you wrote 20 years ago on,
yes.
Was it on leaky gut or intestinal
leaky gut syndrome, the underlying catalyst to countless health disorders, yes.
Okay, so, and that's quite remarkable, the fact that you were on the ball, 20 years ago.
I was fortunate.
How has that changed from 20 years ago, from you wrote your thesis up until now? Has it changed? Has the whole groundwork changed, or is it quite similar?
Well, so I think what has happened now is functional medicine, or the Institute of Functional Medicine, which offers the functional medicine coursework, has become much bigger, much better understood. In fact, the Cleveland Clinic opened a functional medicine wing that is run by Dr. Mark Hyman about 3 or 4 years ago. And by the way, I think he's the busiest MD at the clinic. That's how busy he is, based on how effective functional medicine is. So I think Dr. Oz, same thing. When he first started, he was a hardcore MD. From what I understand, his wife was into natural medicine. Somehow he figured out functional medicine. Next thing I know, he's got Doctors Perlmutter and Hyman and other functional medicine trained MDs on his show, and he realizes and comes out and says himself that as a cardiologist, regardless of the patients that he cannot see, regardless of the kind of MD that he sends them to, they must be trained in functional medicine. And the reason for that is because they're all going to do the same thing. A neurologist, a cardiologist, a rheumatologist, if they're trained in functional medicine, they're just going to treat the gut. They're not even going to worry about all the other stuff that they learned in school, because that's all pharmacology and using drugs to manage symptoms. And in some cases that may be necessary, but that's not where we begin. So he, I think, has really helped with his platform, have a lot more people understand functional medicine. He's done shows on leaky gut. He's brought gastroenterologists on the show talking about the importance of healing a leaky gut. So I think, and of course with the internet, yes, it's much better understood. And I hear more and more clinicians of various kinds, again, naturopaths, MDs, DCs, PhDs, DOs, when you go see them, they're talking gut health. So it's really, really great to see, because the reality is, who needs to be living a gut-friendly lifestyle?
Everybody.
Well, everybody who's interested in their health, right?
Sure.
So that is millions and millions of people, I mean, just in the GTA alone.
Right.
Several million just in the GTA alone. So how many clinicians do we need to be able to service all these people? A lot. So the point to remember here is, where do we begin? We begin with the basics. And the basics are living a gut-friendly lifestyle. And then there's basics within that understanding as well. And as you understand it and begin to apply it, proof's in the pudding.
Which kind of leads me to my next question. You talk about just even several million people in the GTA. And I'm looking at your wall here, and I'm seeing a lot of autographed photographs of what looks to be fitness models and professional athletes and some fighters, some martial artists. And then you probably work on the other spectrum, you work with quite sick people. Ideally, who do you like to work with, or who are you currently working with, and what are you seeing as a commonality among patients?
So first of all, whether you're a sick person or you're an athlete, the chances of you understanding or you're living optimal gut-friendly, because the athlete is probably living somewhat better, not necessarily, because again, the understanding, right? So whether it's the sick person or it's the high performance athlete, we start the same place. It's just with the sick person, it's a little different because we're not trying to optimize their performance as we are with the athletes.
Right.
So it still starts in the same place. I used to do a lot of athletes in the past, and they're great and they're a lot of fun, but there's just a lot more sick people, right? So as a result, you know, one at a time, people just need to come in, sit down, and go over this information, whether it's with you or me or whoever who have an in-depth understanding, so they can learn what it is that they need to do, because it's paramount to your health. And remember, interestingly enough, you cannot be happy if you're not healthy. 80%, 90% actually, I believe, the serotonin, or even 95, is made in the gastrointestinal tract. That's the feel-good neurotransmitter. That 1% is made in the brain. So when people have mood issues, they've got depression issues, we've got to fix that gut. So if you want to be happy, you got to fix the gut. If you have chronic pain, you got to fix the gut. 70% of the immune system in the gut. All these chronic diseases that we see, it's all autoimmune. So it's all stemming from the gut. You've got to get this hyperintestinal permeability under control. If you don't get this under control, then fires begin all over throughout your body, and then we're medicating those, or maybe we're trying to do it with natural medicine. It's much better not to put fires into your body. Then the supplements are not working just to neutralize the problems you're created. They actually work to take you to another level.
Right.
So, sorry, a great line from Vince McMahon, the WWE. He says to his wrestlers, from what I understand, it's great you think you know what you're doing, but do you know what not to do? So I see so many people taking all these supplements, but then when it comes down to diet, they're doing so many things wrong. So if you're doing so many things wrong, you're really not getting the benefit of the supplementation, because the supplementation at best is working on offsetting the problems you're creating.
Yeah, you know, I see that a lot in my practice too. Even though I'm just starting, I see a lot of clients come with a long list of supplements, and they're expressing this sickness or this ailment or this kind of pain, and it's just like, you know, you're taking all these supplements, that's great, but there's so many other fundamental areas to look at. You know, how's their lifestyle, how's their stress management, how's their sleep, and what is the rest of their diet? What are the things that they're not writing down?
100%. And so this is where we get to diet, right? So interestingly enough, Dr. Mark Hyman just wrote a book about this. I believe it's called What the Heck Do We Eat? So is it vegetarian, vegan, fruitarian, keto, high-fat keto, moderate-fat keto, carnivore, Mediterranean, that greens one, plant-based? Which one do we do, right?
There's so many to choose from.
There's so many, and here's what's really interesting. Well, first of all, it's important to understand, and Mark Hyman talked about this in his book, more than 50% of the information that is published in the peer-reviewed literature is bought and paid for. So that means you can prove anything. You want to prove vegan is the way to go? It's in there. You want to prove vegetarian is the way to go? You can prove it.
So these peer-reviewed studies,
yeah,
Dr. Mark Hyman says they're...
Well, it's not even that what Hyman is doing, he's admitting to it because, and I could bring up the reference and show you, but it was published that this is what is going on.
Right.
So, you know, this is supposed to be science, black and white, hardcore.
But someone still needs to pay for these studies.
Well, so some conspiracy theorists would suggest that they're manipulated on purpose,
Sure.
Bought and paid for, because they're trying to create particular outcomes and belief systems in people who read them. So my point to that is all these diets can be proven that they're the way to go.
Right.
Having said that, I think you'll find the most on vegetarian, vegan,
The most information?
most pushing in that direction,
Right.
and the least on keto and carnivore. Now, again, of course, it's what works very best for you, but the problem with the vegetarian and vegan lifestyle, I don't want the vegetarians and the vegans to get super upset with me, is the very high lectin content, and that's a fact. Lectins are the immune system of the plant. By the way, I wrote about lectins 19 years ago, my master's thesis. I got a big X through it. I was told, not based on science. 20 years later, a brilliant MD,
Gundry.
Dr. Stephen Gundry writes his brilliant book,
The Plant Paradox.
The Plant Paradox,
Right.
and he clearly says lectins are bad, no good, take them out. So we need to understand what these lectins are, the immune system of the plant, and they will destroy your gut first and foremost, your nervous system, and they are designed to do so if you don't do what needs to be done to neutralize those lectins. And most people don't, like soaking their beans and fermenting things, and from the vegetarian vegan perspective.
So you think if these vegetarians were a little bit more aware of what lectins to stay away from, then their diet might be a little bit healthier, or a wiser choice?
I think they'll be significantly healthier. So the one place that you're going to find the fewest amount of lectins is meat.
Right.
So as a vegetarian and a vegan, the nuts, the seeds, the fruits, the vegetables, all of these things, the grains especially, high in lectins, high in carbohydrates. This all drives inflammation, of course, starting with leaky gut and free radicals and oxidative stress. Free radicals, same thing. Of course, it's acidic. So there's so much going on. But the thing that amazed me the most, and yes, the argument with B12 deficiency, folic acid deficiency, iron deficiency, but really it's this lectin picture that's overwhelming. Lectins are a serious problem. So if you want to be, and I have people who are vegetarians and vegans, I say to them, you got to go low lectin. There's only one problem if you're going to do that. You got about 10 foods to choose from.
Right.
You're very, very limited. So Dr. Gundry was smart enough to make a product that's a lectin shield, I believe it's called. So it's a lectin blocker, so you take it when you eat. It doesn't allow you to absorb the lectins, and so you're further ahead. So yes, as the vegan and vegetarian environment, family, community, I think this is something very, very important to keep in mind, because these lectins are harmful. Now here's the thing. Do a search, and I'm sure you'll find a ton of information suggesting that this is completely wrong. That's the way it works. This is where the confusion is. This is where Mark Hyman came in with his book and said there's tremendous confusion on purpose.
Right.
So we need to understand what works. Now you can watch a different YouTube video or listen to different podcasts, and you'll get different answers from the people who are speaking. But ultimately, in my humble opinion, from what I have seen in my practice, and I'm a member of all these groups on Facebook, and I'm constantly, and have been for some time, the low-lectin, keto, carnivore groups, everybody is saying not only are they losing a ton of weight, but they're coming off their medications, and it's mind-bogglingly life-changing. So it can't be bad. Yeah. We certainly can't go to the scientific literature, because we know 50% is bought and paid for, so where do we go? Anecdotal evidence. People share their experiences who just want to help. They have nothing to gain. They're not selling anything. They're sharing their experiences. So my point is, there's absolutely something very powerful to low-lectin keto carnivore. And I think everybody should consider trying it. I understand those who have a very difficult time eating meat for moral reasons. I totally get it. But if you're okay eating meat, I think you should try it. I think there's a tremendous amount of, at least certainly, anecdotal evidence. There's scientific evidence as well that it's seriously beneficial. And when you look at Jordan Peterson, I use this story all the time. You know Jordan Peterson?
No. I'm sure.
He's a famous author. I can't remember even what he was talking about, but he was on the Joe Rogan show, and somebody had sent it to me, and there was a clip where he was not talking about his book, and he said, his daughter was very sick, extremely depressed, on multiple medications. I don't know what else was going on with her, but a number of different things, and she decided to eat meat only. And within no time at all, off all meds, her intense depression completely cleared, and whatever other issues she suffered from also cleared. So Jordan Peterson says, I'm doing the same thing. If you're not doing the same thing, what are you doing? The opposite. That means it's likely you're going to have issues as well. So he starts following the all-meat diet. He has tremendous success as well. So again, I think there's real evidence to at least contemplate trying it.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because you said that the daughter was manic depression, or very depressed.
Very depressed.
And we know that B12 is very crucial for cognition and mood. And then you mentioned previously or earlier that a lot of vegans are B12 deficient. Knowing that if people aren't living a gut healthy lifestyle, their stomach isn't providing enough hydrochloric acid to absorb and break down the B12. Also, what's the difference between those two different types of B12? Because I know so many vegetarians are talking about B12 and they're getting the B12 in these supplements, but it's cyanocobalamin, and then there's the methylcobalamin, which is the organic form. Do you want to just explain that, and just how, or explain, where they're getting it from and what's the best case?
So B12 is mostly found in meat. The problem is, if you've been not living a gut-friendly lifestyle, you've created a situation in your gastrointestinal tract where you're not producing intrinsic factor. So, or certainly enough intrinsic factor. And intrinsic factor needs to bind to B12 because B12 is quite large for it to be absorbed. So we've already got an issue here if you've created it. So even if you're eating B12 containing foods, and as a vegetarian and as a vegan, you're trying to go through plants, it makes it very difficult. So getting it supplemented in the cyanocobalamin form is fine if you can enzymatically easily convert it to methylcobalamin.
Okay.
Actually hydroxy and then methylcobalamin. If you can do that, great. If you can't, it's a potential problem. So this is pretty fundamental across the board when it comes to B12 deficiencies for the vegetarians and vegans. But I think that the lectin picture is a much bigger overall problem. And remember, the lectins are what causing the dysfunction in the gut, so you can't absorb the B12.
Right.
You've got to take out, Vince McMahon, do you know what not to do? You got to take out what's harming you. Do you know what that is? Well, many people believe it's pork, it's red meat, and it's eggs, and it's these types of foods. And, from what we are seeing, that's simply not true. It's quite the opposite. You take everything out and you eat, and guys, if you look into the carnivore groups, they're eating lots of red meat and thriving. And what I really love is when somebody comes in the group and says, yeah, I've been doing this for 15, 20 years. Really? What are your results? Take a look. Like 15 years younger than my age. I'm in great health, great shape. I never have, right? So, conspiracy theorists might say that they're telling us to eat all the wrong foods, to eat vegan, vegetarian. I'm not saying that I'm saying that. What I'm saying is that's what mainstream really promotes, not keto carnivore. They try to scare us away from keto carnivore. So, Dr. Atkins was pushing this in the 70s, and he was a cardiologist. So unfortunately, he was the only one pushing it. So it's one man against everybody else, and it dies out to some extent. A guy 30, 40 years before him doing the same thing, 30, 40 years before him doing the same thing. In 95, protein power. That's where I first came across it in real detail. Here we are again, 2019, and
everything's going keto, and
everything's going back in that direction.
Right.
Why does it keep going back in that direction? Because it works.
Right.
What doesn't work is a ton of carbohydrates, because a ton of carbohydrates just destroy your insulin sensitivity, drive inflammation, and of course, all stemming from the same thing, which is leaky gut.
Right.
And all these foods that are high in carbohydrates are also going to be high in lectins. So it's a
vicious cycle.
Vicious, continuous, ongoing. And what's really unfortunate is when the person believes that this is the way to go, and they're wholeheartedly doing this. And don't get me wrong, 25 years ago, I was doing it as well.
Yep.
I thought vegetarian, vegan was the way to go, and I was doing it exactly, to the T as I was learning. Well, I know a little different now, and I have for a number of years, but those who are doing the vegetarian, vegan diet to a T, if you're consuming lectins galore and other anti-nutrients, oxalates, phytic acids, you're just compounding your problem, and you're not realizing it.
Right.
You think you're doing great, but really you're compounding your problem. I'll tell you something fascinating, and you should maybe throw this on down below. Dr. Sean Baker was the first one I saw talk about on the Joe Rogan show about eating meat only.
Okay.
Anyways, fast forward a year and a half, 2 years later, and he does a video and says, I did this, well, he did several different diagnostics, but he did one cardiovascular one, some type of a calcium.
On himself?
Yes, well,
Okay.
he didn't do it, but he had it done, right? So he's just bringing the report.
Yep.
And he says that this particular cardiovascular test is the #1 determining test in the world, according to the world's leading cardiologist, who's a vegan, by the way,
Okay.
who says that this is the #1 determining factor in, the health of your heart.
Right.
And this guy eats 2 to 5 pounds of red meat per sitting per day, and to that point, he had been doing it at least once, if not 2, 3 times a day for a year and a half to 2 years. So this guy, 20 times beyond the recommended daily amount. Let's see what his numbers show. He turns the paper around and it was a 0. Absolutely perfect. That of a incredibly healthy 20-year-old.
Wow.
That's what his results came back. And then he showed his other results as well. They were outstanding also. And Nothing, from MDs, taking away from MDs, but typically they're, incredible academics, really, really bright people. They're not power lifters and rugby players. Whereas this guy, power lifter, he's got a 500 or 700 pounds deadlift. I mean, he's a world-class athlete. He holds Dr. Baker here, he holds 2 world records in cardio-intensive sports, and he eats meat only. And
still?
And not meat only, but mostly red meat.
Yeah.
If not all red meat, yes.
Wow.
Still. He's got great cardio. I mean, he looks great. I think he's 52. I think he looks 35.
Yeah.
So there's something to this.
There's
and
something there, sure.
The worst thing, or the minimum that I think anybody should do, is do your own homework, do your own research, and if you're brave enough to give it a go,
yeah,
I think you'll be pleased with the results.
I think that, it could be a little extreme for some people, but it's certainly something to entertain and adopt slowly. And
but that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Get your feet wet. Some people watching this are going to go, oh my gosh, I love this, I'm going to jump all over it.
Right.
Others are going to go, well, I don't know how accurate they are, I'm going to read up on this. And some will say, nope, I read the opposite, not interested. And then of course some will be interested, and everything in between. So all we are trying to do is get the information out, and then you do with it what you feel is best.
Which is great, and I want to kind of divert the train a little bit. You had mentioned about serotonin being a mood neurotransmitter, and now we're going to talk about sugar, and you said a lot of people are too high in carbohydrates. With today's diet, do you think that foods are kind of designed with a certain method to either change their brain chemistry into requiring more carbohydrates, or do you think the carbohydrates and the high sugar is creating that neurochemistry individually on its own, and then thus creating that whole downward cycle into the addiction of carbohydrates and sugar foods?
So for sure, I remember reading an article, I'm not sure when it was, one of the fast food chains, I'm not going to mention which one, puts dopamine and serotonin mimicking chemicals into their food. So when you consume it, you feel good. And when you're hungry again, you're thinking, I'm going back there to eat because it makes me feel good, right? So that is already a problem for several reasons, because GMOs and everything else that's associated with what you're eating is compromising your gut, and it's a feed-forward circle because it keeps bringing you back. But that's not where you began. You had already had issues.
Right.
Because potentially came through C-section, you came through a birth canal that was not healthy, and the reality is, from a microbiome perspective, the reality is the birth canal gets its microbiome diversity from the colon. So if mom is not living a gut-friendly lifestyle, then guess what? The microbiome in the birth canal is not going to be ideally balanced. So when junior comes through and the first inoculation happens, you're not going to get the right diversity inoculating you. As a result, everything is compromised, brain development and the whole bit. This is the whole idea, or theory, if you want to call it that, to ADD, autism, this type of stuff. So what I think also happens, and I see it with friends and their little kids, is they love to eat their bread. They love to eat their sweets. Why? Because that's what quiets them down. They're screaming if they don't get it.
Right.
And eventually they have an addiction to the gluten, to the sugar, to the whatever, and it just becomes an ongoing process.
That's really interesting how you really went totally sideways into the birthing of a child and then connected it to, the mother's gut health, and then it being transferred into the baby's health, and then that quite essentially could cause or perpetrate the addiction for sugars.
100%. And then what happens is you start to create insulin insensitivity, right? Not diabetic, but issues, blood sugar issues. So then you need your carbs, and you're going up and down with your carbohydrate consumption because it makes you feel better. You do this long enough, and depending on your genes, you bring that perfect storm together, and boom, you're going to create all sorts of different issues. So, interestingly enough, it's very, very important to understand that genes are not our destiny. So this is why what we are talking about here is so empowering, because The brains of the cell is not the DNA called the central dogma that mainstream medicine teaches. Dr. Bruce Lipton figured this out, I believe, 2004 or 5. I remember coming across this information in 2008. And any MD who studies functional medicine will learn about this, but this is mind-boggling when they actually understand how this works. Because if the DNA is the brains of the cell, then, oh yeah, genetics. Yeah, genetics. There's nothing you can do about your genes. They're just there. What you eat, what you don't eat, what you think, what you feel, sleep, doesn't matter. The genes are going to express, and we, touch the mic there, we as Big Pharma, you're lucky we're here because we can symptom treat, right? So that's the mindset most people have going into disease. And that's the mainstream medicine central dogma model. Dogma is not meaning science, it's meaning of religious belief, right? So science really tells us, according to Dr. Bruce Lipton, the brains of the cell is the cell membrane. And so you got 100 trillion of you little guys, cells, communicating along with your microbiome, which I believe 10 times outnumbers that 100 trillion. So there's a tremendous amount of communication, web-like communication, not compartmental, going on. And so what they want to know is what the internal environment, otherwise known as the internal milieu, what does it look like? What's going on? Well, is it lots of inflammation, high oxidative stress, acidity, cortisol, nutrient density, nutrient deficiency, toxicity, a whole lot of negative emotions? All of these things come together, and this is all ultimately information. Food is information. And based on this information, if you're living a gut-friendly lifestyle, what happens is the brains of the cell will tell the blueprint, which is the DNA, what to express. So my dad had diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. Am I concerned about getting any of those things? I sure am not. Why not? Because I'm doing the exact opposite with respect to lifestyle.
Really, what you're talking about is epigenetics. You're talking about the environment is what really kind of dictates to the DNA or dictates to the cell what's going to happen and what direction it's going to go.
Well, it's going to dictate it because it's going to see the environment as either, to keep it very simple, positive or negative.
Right.
If it's a positive environment, a healthy environment, it's going to tell the blueprint to express healthy genes. If it's an unhealthy environment, it's going to tell the blueprint to express disease genes. So once we understand this, we understand that if you eat a ton of sugar, one person may end up expressing cancer, another one heart disease, another arthritis, another depression, and lectins, and so on and so forth. We were talking about earlier, all the foods we want to try to avoid. Eating those foods doesn't mean you're going to get one disease in particular. It means you're going to get whatever's in your DNA. However, who's in control of what you eat, what you drink, what you think, what you feel? It's all on you.
Right.
And this is the big aha for Dr. Bruce Lipton. He's been teaching this since, I believe, 2005. You need to take control, just like Mercola says, of your own health, what you eat, what you think, what you drink, all these fundamental things, because they all come together to speak to each other, and then that cell membrane, which is the brains of the cell, tells the DNA what to express. So let's say you get this, and I'm assuming that everyone has got this to some extent. The next question is feeding a whole lot of vegetarian and vegan foods going to create an internal environment where the brains of the cell tells the DNA to express health? Well, what you're doing is consuming a very large amount of lectins and other types of anti-nutrients.
Right.
So the answer is probably not going to be very high as far as yes goes. Now, again, if you choose to be a vegan or vegetarian and you are eating low-lectin foods, you are taking Lectin Shield. I don't make any money off Lectin Shield.
I was going to say.
I'm just saying because it's the only
it's a great product.
only blocker that I know. If you're not doing that, then you're bringing in a great amount of lectins on a consistent basis that is beating you down, beating you down, beating you down.
Which actually leads me to my next kind of comment. You made a perfect analogy of, the coming together of a perfect storm. And that storm would then technically be whether that autoimmune condition expresses itself or the disease or whatnot. And Dr. Tom O'Brien talks about the perfect storm, I guess, coming together, but not really. He says we all have like a link of a chain. And whatever the weakest link is in that chain, that's where that sickness,
the break will happen.
That's where the break's going to happen. So it takes a lifestyle or a lifetime of poor eating habits or good eating habits for that weakness in the chain somewhere to break, and then the expression happens, and as you say, the perfect storm to really come together.
To express either disease or health. Again, if your lifestyle is not conducive to living a gut-friendly lifestyle, then you're going in a different direction than if you are living a gut-friendly lifestyle. So the weakest link in the chain is that DNA. Whatever that weakest link is, if you consistently go on long enough doing all the wrong things, and unfortunately, I've never had in 22 years somebody walk in and says, everything you're telling me to do, I do already. In fact, the vast majority have been they always say, I've never heard of any of this stuff, or the majority of what you're talking about. Well, that's why you're here. And you could have been to 5 other clinicians. If they're not telling you these fundamental things, and every day you're eating the wrong things, you're definitely harming yourself, not healing yourself. So the question really becomes, what are the optimal foods? Well, I think the book, The Plant Paradox, is a great book to explain to you why you want to avoid grains, pseudo grains, all sorts of high lectin vegetables. There's tons of stuff there that you can eat that are low lectin. My diet specifically is low lectin keto carnivore, but what I often advocate to people is, especially when they're really struggling with some issues, for the first 30 days eat meat only. And you know what? You may love it and you may never want to stop, like I've seen some people do. But after those 30 days, because meat heals, after those 30 days you can start incorporating some low lectin vegetables. So the main low lectin vegetable that I incorporate, in fact I just figured out this phenomenal dish, it's so simple to make, is cauliflower. So is broccoli, but cauliflower is less. Why? Because cauliflower is green. Green tends to have higher anti-nutrients. Anyway, so they make... The broccoli has higher anti-nutrients than the cauliflower because it's green.
Right.
Anyway, so they make these bags of frozen broccoli, and they're rice pea size. So I've tried making it straight frozen, thawing it out to some extent.
Okay.
That to me is the best one, or thawing it out completely.
Right.
Then I dump it into a bowl. I throw 2-3 scoops of different kinds of powders on top, mostly protein.
Powders?
Protein powders, yeah.
Okay.
So, OptiCleanse, because it's a functional food, not just a protein powder.
Right.
But I will throw some additional protein powder on top of that. I add some water, and I turn this thing not into a shake, but into a paste, right? Now you can throw a few nuts on that, low lectin nuts.
Okay.
The 2 main low lectin nuts are pecans and walnuts. So you could throw some of that. I personally am putting a little bit of olive oil on it, just because I want to, in a meal like that, there would be very little fat.
Right.
So I would just want to add a little bit more. But typically, I'm not someone who adds fat. When you're eating meat, there's no need to add fat. Anyways, I put cinnamon on top. I stir this thing up, sometimes even put a little bit of cottage cheese.
Sounds like a dessert.
It's unbelievable. It truly is unbelievable. So that is an example of keto.
Maybe
carnivore.
We can put a description in the below, kind of the recipe.
Very simple.
Cool.
Yeah. So that's a perfect example of keto carnivore. So it gives you, once you're at that level, it gives you more variety. Initially, everybody says, well, I can't just eat meat. Look, I know you can't, but just do it for 30 days, right? And then
what's your success rate with that? Like, are you seeing people really turning around some of the conditions, or what are the conditions that you see?
It's crazy. I mean, yeah, everybody always improves. So, the analogy I like to use is if you have a 50-pound weight on your back, and you come in with back pain, and say, well, we can move your gait, or we can do this, or we could, adjust here, or we can just remove the 50-pound weight. So when we remove all these lectins and anti-nutrients out of people's diets, just that alone is already going to make them better. And then when you understand that meat heals, it's a fundamental fact. You're made of red meat, I'm made of red meat, we're all made of red meat. Meat heals. So you take out what's harming and you add in what heals. And I'll tell you guys one really interesting thing, going way back into the late 90s and early 2000s, and I studied functional medicine until about 2015, when we would have brilliant speakers from all over the world come in, and they would show patient presented at this particular date with these symptoms. We did the blood draws. They would just very detail everything right out for you. here's the protocol that they followed, and here were the clinical outcomes at the end of 16 weeks. I mean, you know, the downside to that, it works great. The downside to that is they make various functional foods in powder form, and that's what they were using to create these outcomes.
Right.
They're just expensive.
Sure.
So today, what I'm seeing with intermittent fasting, right? 16 hours, I like to see a little bit more, 18. 16 is good, very, very good, but if you can do 18, even better. And then keto carnivore during your eating window, just those two things alone, huge results. Now, if to that you can add some basic fundamental gut supportive supplementation, now we've got something that I think the vast majority could afford, because for many years, for me, I didn't go about it this way. I tried a whole bunch of different ways, and you know, you try to optimize, maximize, and you try to make it as feasible for people as possible, so everybody could, or more and more people can afford it.
Right.
So back then it was more expensive because I was using these elaborate products. So I use simpler products, but the reason we can get away with that, especially initially, is because we're doing two very fundamental things: fasting,
right,
and keto carnivore. So there are some days where I just eat meat only, and there are other days where I do not. And I love it. It works great for many reasons. You know, go on YouTube and look for these carnivore, low-lectin keto groups and read
and see what they look like. Yeah,
it's phenomenal the stuff they are saying. You know, and sorry, the you would think that, you know, and it's true, grass-fed, pasture-raised, organic meats are better, no question. But a lot of people can't afford to do that, so they're buying the cheapest cuts of meat, and they're still benefiting tremendously. It's really interesting. Yeah.
You'd mentioned about the you know, the 50-pound dumbbell analogy, and you didn't even mention processed foods, gluten. You know, what about those? You got to take all those out too,
well,
right?
Listen, very simply, how can you eat processed foods? As an example, if all you're eating is meat and keto,
right?
Meat, for sure, you can have a very, very hard time fighting processed foods, and then keto, I mean, anything that is processed, you're going to find at a health food store, organic and all, you know, to turn it keto. So I wouldn't call those foods a bad way to go, especially if you're on the run, right? And you just want to grab something quickly. So just by definition of what low-lectin keto carnivore is, everything is gone. Sugar's gone, grains are gone, preservatives are gone. I mean, all those additives, all those chemicals, all those things are out. And remember, you do not want to bring chemicals in. Right. And then at the same time, you want to be supporting the body to detox what's already in there. Right? Fundamentals.
So a lot of my viewers and subscribers are in bodybuilding, and they're athletes. And you know, in my experience, as you know, competing, I needed those carbohydrates to drive in the proteins and, you know, get my pump and get my size. And since, you know, kind of taking a step back away from the competing, I've certainly been doing a lot more intermittent fasting, and I've been doing some of the keto, and I'm doing some carb cycling. How would you recommend, you know, an athlete or a bodybuilder to try that approach? Because they still need those carbs, but at the same time, I understand the keto and the carnivore and the intermittent fasting is going to be really beneficial to their bodybuilding as well.
Well, I think health comes first, right? So taking the carbs out is very visual, that's for sure. You're not going to get the same workouts.
Right.
It'll be a bit of a struggle. If you added enough sodium, potassium, some of the electrolytes, you can definitely make up for it, but it's not going to be the same for sure as if you're consuming carbs. But so what? If you're stepping on stage on Sunday, carb up Friday, Saturday, right? The rest of the time, and you know, typically you can do a 5-day depletion. Monday through Friday, you don't consume any carbs, and then you carb up Saturday and Sunday. I've done that many times over the years, but I prefer, for the most part, to avoid carbs. I don't feel great when I consume carbs. And the other problem with consuming carbs is you overdo it.
Right.
It's really easy to overdo, because if you want to eat pizza, and you know, I usually, when I carb up with good carbs, but sometimes you want to eat pizza.
Sure.
And
see, look at that. You know what? You've got a physique, and we haven't even shown the viewers yet. Your physique is crazy, and
thanks, buddy.
It just goes to show that you're human too.
100%.
You like pizza.
And I love pizza.
you've got cheap food. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I think a lot of people have this conception or perception that, you know, we're either lying behind the scenes and we're gorging ourselves, or we're not human, and there's no way that we can function, and that how can these people be so steadfast with their diets and just be, you know, clean all the time. But you just said it, you know, you enjoy your pizza once in a while too.
I do, but you know what? I got to tell you, what it really has helped is the fasting.
Yep.
Understanding time-restricted eating. I don't see myself depriving myself the same way that I was doing so back in the mid to late 90s. It's become an easier lifestyle because of the intermittent fasting and the time-restricted eating. But if I say to myself, okay, you know, today's Saturday and I'm just going to carb today, where am I going to go and what am I going to eat? So my favorite carb up is oatmeal on the stove, not in the microwave.
Yep.
And I dump a bunch of cottage cheese on that, and I dump a bunch of maple syrup, right?
Now, do you salt it?
I do not, because
Okay.
there's salt on the thing already, the cottage cheese.
Right.
And I'm telling you, my gosh, like, it's funny because I made something like this back in university, in undergrad, and I made it for years, except I would microwave. I didn't know any better. And I would also use canned peaches. I didn't know any better. So now, obviously, I don't even use fruit because of the fructose and the way that you know, you store carbs with fructose. You want it in the muscle, not in the liver. Anyway, so I avoid the fruit part of it, but the real carb up aspect is the maple syrup, and that combination is just orgasmic. It's crazy. I stuffed myself, and unfortunately, within a few hours, my brain is going, give me some more of that.
Yeah.
So if you can control it, carb ups are fine. I got a bit of difficult time, so you know, at 48, it's not as easy as it was at 28.
48.
I'm 48. Yeah.
So I really would like to see your stomach. You're gonna have to show, stand up and show. What's so, you know, before you do that, what's so remarkable is you preach the lifestyle. You've been doing this passionately and sharing this information with everyone and anyone, and you are an exact figure and replica of what you teach, which is, it's so powerful because, you know, the proof is in the pudding.
Thanks, but here's what I would say is there are a lot of people in the gym who look great but don't get the fundamentals. And they look great because they're doing their best, they're trying hard, they work hard out in the gym, but the fundamentals are not there. So you can't really say, hey, just because that guy looks good, you got to go beyond that. I think for me, you know, there's something called chronological age, which I'm chronologically 48. So biologically, ideally, you want to be less than your chronological.
Now, how much of the population are higher, not lower?
Of course, absolutely. I think that's the majority. But again, why? Because they're not living a gut-friendly lifestyle. So it comes back to the same thing. And then when we talk about what that gut-friendly lifestyle is, this is where the controversy kicks in.
Right. We
believe it's low-lectin keto carnivore. You know, personally, when you look, we both are very spiritual. Certainly not just about the body; it's mind, body, and spirit. I got Namaste written on my arm here. But when I get vegetarian or vegan clients, and they say to me that they're yogi in India, you know, vegetarian, and how old he is, and I say, well, that's great, but you know, look at the guy. He's incredibly frail. I don't want to look incredibly frail. I mean,
you know, it's funny that you mentioned that, because there's a big movement right now with anti-aging and longevity.
Anti-senescence more than anti-aging.
Sure,
but yes.
And Dr. Hyman recently interviewed, and I really should know, but I can't remember the doctor's name. He's an Italian, and he's kind of the guru on aging or anti-aging, or how to preserve or prolong your life. And you know, he talks about all of these. Is it the centurions?
Centurions, people who live to 100 years of age.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's amazing to live that long. And you know, what regions of the world do they live in? But at the same time, they are very frail. They are not muscular. They only eat very, very limited. They certainly practice time-restricted eating, right? And it's great. I think that's wonderful, but at the same time, it's not our way. It's not because we're athletes, but it's certainly something to look at, as a tool or something to consider, how to prolong one's life.
So living to 100 is great, but if you can't see, can't hear, and can't function, it's not so great. That's suffering.
Now, none of these people that he interviews, they're not in that
Beautiful.
state.
So if they're totally coherent and functional
Right.
and can drive, and then that's fantastic. So, you've got genes that are living in an environment that their genes have been living for thousands of years potentially, right? So, again, me personally, I'm not a huge dude, but I'm in decent shape, and I always want to maintain the shape. I've got a 400-pound deadlift. That's not really a lot, but for 48, that's okay. I plan on holding on to this into my 70s. And how am I going to do that if I'm not eating enough protein, if I'm consuming foods that are breaking me down constantly and beating up on me? I mean, there's already the chemicals, poisons, toxins, flu shots, and fluoride, and so many different things that are we're up against.
Your mentor says that we have over 7,000 chemicals floating in us, just from the environment and from the foods that we eat. Like 7,000. We didn't have 7,000 chemicals in our bodies, 100 years ago.
Absolutely. So it's progressively getting worse. This is why my mentor, Dr. Bob Rakowski, said years ago, you must detox these chemicals out of your body. So, what we want to do is understand that the body can do a lot of these things on its own if we support it and give it the fundamental support it needs from a nutrient status to be able to do these things. But if we do the opposite, we poison it and we don't give it these nutrients, it's just a matter of time that things are going to start to fall apart. And this is the reality of it. So this is what I have been viewing and watching and witnessing the last 22 years. Everybody always gets better. So instead of writing very unique programs for each person, I think what people need is to understand basics. And basics are the diet, gut health, and of course that's the fundamental to the diet, and just a few basic things as far as what it means to live a gut-friendly lifestyle. And then you really want to be researching this on your own and learning more and more about it. Now remember, you will always find 10 articles that disagree. And there's a reason for that. Why? I don't know. Some conspiracy theorists, they like to say they're doing that on purpose. I don't know. But it's up to you to figure out what you believe and what works very best for you.
Right. It's we don't have much time left, and there's so much to talk about. You'd mentioned just about the longevity and the long living, and you'd mentioned till you're about 70. I think I want to do the same thing where, am I concerned about my vanity? Sure, to a certain extent. I love my physique.
Listen, I think it's important to do so, right? It's all mind, body, spirit. We don't put mind, the body, or the spirit ahead of one or the other. We really do a good job, I believe, on putting it all together, and I think that's very important.
And so I absolutely passionately love going to the gym, and I love the lifestyle that I'm living. And I think that I will continue to eat the foods that I'm going to eat, but there will be a time when that kind of novelty will wear off, and I think I'm definitely going to switch into much more prolonged fasting, a lot more conducive kind of lifestyle to try to live till I'm 100.
Well, so several things. Number one, I think if you're living a gut-friendly lifestyle, just the fundamentals, just the basics, I think you're giving yourself a really good chance of not expressing chronic illness. Now, I personally don't believe we should fast beyond 24 hours other than once in a while, because you just can lose muscle mass. And losing metabolic tissue is not ideal. So, if you want to do that once in a while, okay, but for the most part, I really don't think, beyond 22, 23 is necessary. You are 35?
36.
36. So I'm 48. So exactly what you said. I was saying the same type of stuff at your age, and as you get older, you'll realize that it's definitely much more about health, staying super lean, because you like the look, but it's so focused on health all the time.
Right.
And the more that you can fine tune and this whole living a gut-friendly lifestyle, and your whole lifestyle just simply falls in line, in other words, from a gut-friendly perspective, and you just live. It's just you. It is just what it is. So it's not like you're trying, it's just what it is. Then it compounds itself. You do that from 1 year to the next year to the next year to the next year, versus the opposite, which takes you in the deficit position.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that, just about the compound effect. If people in general had an understanding of compound interest, and if they could just apply that to themselves, their lifestyle, on a physical level, on a nutritional level, on a spiritual level, just do the things daily. Do some breathing, do a little bit of meditation, eat healthier foods, go to the gym. What's going to happen in 6 months, a year from now, 2 years from now?
See, but and what you're saying is 100% correct. But the problem is, for those people who have kids, there's so much. They're just happy to get through the day and get it done. And for those people, if you, yes, I'd like to see you exercise. That would be great. But if you could just get the diet right, and remember, when you're crazy busy at work, you're running after kids, you're bringing them home, you're feeding them. Just something you and I know nothing about because we don't have kids. There's so much. So they're so stressed out. They just want to eat something and just get it done. But it's really important to remember not to do that. Or do your best not to do that, to do your best to try to not just feed yourself, but feed your kids the same lifestyle, because they're going to benefit from it huge as well. So
if you could maybe summarize or break it down, kind of a protocol, or what would you recommend for someone who's really, really busy, on the go, and they just want a few steps to get a better handle on their health and fitness, or health and wellness, I should say?
So a friend of mine works 14 hours a day, 7 days a week in a construction site, and he was telling me, we were talking about fasting, and he says, him and the guys, they just work so hard, they just couldn't do that. And so I must say, okay, if you cannot do it, I get it, but if you can do it, fasting is profoundly important, primarily because of a process called mitophagy and autophagy. Yes, exercise drives this too. I believe there's another way to drive it as well, but really fasting is the key, a big key here. So autophagy is the body's natural ability to heal itself and clean itself, get rid of the old cells and aspects of old cells, recycle. And then there's mitophagy, which is the same thing except at the mitochondrial level. So we know that so many of these chronic illnesses are not just rooted in leaky gut, but are rooted in mitochondrial dysfunction. So we want to keep those mitochondria healthy. So fasting for this amount of time is really important. And really, to the average person who's never done this before, how much autophagy and mitophagy have they experienced in their life?
Probably very minimal.
Very minimal, exactly.
Right.
So give your body a chance to heal itself. Fasting, it's free. And then get yourself eating OMAD, 1 meal a day, 2 meals a day. And it's not that expensive when you're only eating once or twice a day, and you're eating low-lectin keto carnivore.
And that's just it. It's got to be strategic. So they can't just kind of break that fast with a burger and fries or some spaghetti or something like that.
Well, here's what's interesting. Look, the guy on Dr. Oz, he would fast for 24 hours, and I forget the guy's name, but he would eat 4,000 calories right before bed, and his amount of food was like this. You couldn't even see the guy until he'd eaten half of it down. So what you're saying is absolutely right. In my humble opinion, if we're talking optimal, is that you want what you're eating during your eating window, in my opinion, to be low-lectin keto carnivore. This guy said he eats whatever he wants, and he's also helped 1,500 other people lose a ton of weight as well. So Dr. Oz says, okay, well, that's great. This makes no sense to me whatsoever. This is the exact opposite I learned in medical school. But let's look at his biomarkers. They're probably terrible. He looks at his biomarkers, and they're unbelievable. They're perfect. So what does this tell us? What this tells me is that this very long fast is profoundly healing.
Okay.
And it's profoundly powerful to set you up to eat whatever you want.
So it allows the body, it's not really compensating, but it allows for that shortened window of eating whatever, because the state of the fast, the body's healing, cleaning, detoxifying, and everything else.
And it can handle you dumping pizza and I don't know if he had donuts. I know he had Smarties on his
Now, would you recommend this?
I would not.
Okay.
And the reason I would not is because I want optimal.
Right.
Right? And I think that's just too much food. I mean, he felt he needed 4,000 or 5,000 calories a day because that's what he burned through whatever he was doing, occupation.
So he's an outlier. He's not. He's not
definitely
normal.
would be an outlier. But again, it's important to see how powerful fasting is.
Right.
One meal, and at night before bed, and he still had great results. But remember, he is an outlier, but the 1,500 other people.
Right.
Right. I mean, how much of this did they follow exactly to this T? I tried eating 3,000 or 4,000 calories before bed, and there's just no way, because, ladies and gentlemen, calories matter. If you need to consume, as an example, just an example, 1,500 calories a day to lose body fat, and you're consuming 3,000, whether you're consuming it in the form of ketogenic foods or carbohydrates, it's just too many calories, period.
Right.
So calories absolutely matter. Another great thing about keto is it takes your appetite away, so it's easier to eat less food. So you've got the benefit of the intermittent fasting, the time-restricted eating, all the benefits of keto. And remember, when you're fasting, you're in keto. So the keto state is the healing state. There's no question. So the ideal for me, fast, minimum 16 hours, autophagy, mitophagy really kick in at 16, so you don't want to get kicked out 5 minutes in. 17, 18 is probably a little better, but do your best. And then you're eating those last 4 or 5 hours.
Now, isn't it true that you can have coffee when you're in a fasted state?
Yes, you can. You just can't really put much into it. So I believe you can put monk fruit. It won't break your fast.
People I know are going to ask stevia.
I was just going to say, I believe stevia can be as well. But remember, when you break the fast, you're breaking your shot at autophagy, mitophagy more than anything else. So from that, but I believe it also drives it, if I, off the top of my head. So coffee does have benefits. And if you could drink it black, you could drink 10 a day.
And I was just going to say, go for that coffee with the Ganoderma lucidum in it. Right?
Of course, it's the very best coffee. The Organo Gold coffee is the very best coffee. You got the Ganoderma in it, 100%. If you can drink it black, you can drink as many as you want on a daily basis. It's pure health. And one of the great things about coffee, I can't drink it black, that's unfortunately, but one of the great things about coffee, it takes your appetite away. And it allows you to get through the day until you've got your eating window.
And so it's strategic. That's the main thing. That's kind of what we're trying to emphasize. The fast is strategic, having 100%. The coffee is strategic, and the foods that you're going to have after, that's strategic.
Everything's strategic, 100%, right. The majority of the time, except on the weekend, when it's strategic again, but the other way.
Sure.
Now, you're carbing up, or in other words, enjoying, some family events, some social events, where you can let go and eat all sorts of different foods. Boom, you're back at it come Monday.
And I think that's a perfect, maybe almost way to close. So many clients that I have, and patients I'm sure that you have, say, I can't really do this because I have a family event coming up on the weekends. So then now we can say, well, that's great. You know what? From day 3, 4, and 5, this is how you're going to eat, and then on that day, enjoy.
100%. But remember, some is better than none. So even if you don't do it perfectly all 5 days, 2-3 days is some is better than none. Because remember, what we're trying to do, to a large extent, is regain metabolic flexibility. So it's the mitochondria's ability to utilize glucose and ketones to make energy. So when you haven't been consuming fat, but you've been consuming carbohydrates for a long time, you burned out your mitochondria to some extent, your mitochondria's ability to make
They're just
energy.
Completely taxed, that's right.
Right, so what we want to do is stop that, but we still need to make energy. So do it through fat. So you crank the fat, get the mitochondria to be able to utilize fat to make ketones, and now you can go back and forth between the two, except it's 5 days no carbs and 1 or 2 days carbs, and this is regaining your metabolic flexibility.
Not to mention, I guess, really enhancing your insulin sensitivity and utilization of carbohydrates.
Well, the 5 days are absolutely significant, and that's one of the great things about the 5 days of no carbs is you significantly enhance insulin sensitivity, you deplete all your glycogen, you have a depletion workout, then you add this stuff back in, and in conjunction with being depleted and your insulin sensitivity improved, you have this fantastic carb up. So you look in the mirror, for those who are aesthetically oriented. They'd be looking in the mirror and going, man, it's Monday morning, I look fantastic. Friday, I look terrible. Yeah, that's how it works. So in your mind, you have to be okay that aesthetically you're not going to look super pleasing. Now, this took me a very long time to befriend, and I'm finally at the point in my life where I really don't, it's fine. I enjoy being depleted more so than being carved up for a number of different reasons.
Right.
I feel better. My face is tighter. I'd much rather avoid the carbs, but that doesn't mean never consume any carbs, especially fruit. Fruit should be consumed in the summer months while they're in season. And then guess what happens when they're no longer in season?
Take them out.
Back to keto, right?
Sure.
I mean, we've got grocery stores, so they're around all year round, but that's the time of the year. Why? Because you fatten yourself up, get ready for the difficult winter months. Right. And you lose the weight over the course of those winter months, and we start back up again. So it's carbs for 3-4 months, and then...
And that's you in a nutshell. That's holistic living, right?
100%. Now, I'm not saying, and I have before, this summer I'm not so much, but if I'm going to eat fruit, it will be during those 3-4 months.
Why don't we really quickly take a look at your stomach? So again, you're how old? We don't want this to fall. 48.
48.
Like, did you train for this? Did you diet for this?
I did, man. I did. Listen, cardio, diet, the whole bit.
It's pretty remarkable, to look like that at 48.
I appreciate it, but look, I don't have kids, and it's just me. So, I'll go for a bike ride, hour and a half.
Sure.
I'll go to the gym afterwards for an hour, and then I'll go home and I'll do cardio for 30 minutes. And I don't do HIIT. And the reason I don't do HIIT is because it's too hard. So technically I get like a 3-hour workout day. But the good news, I believe, once I get down to where I want to be, which I think I've got a little bit of back fat and 6-7 pounds or so to go. Once I get down, maintenance is easy.
Right.
Because you don't have to under-calorie eat. If you're trying to lose, you got to under-calorie eat. And you got to do the cardio, and you got to struggle. You know this better than I do. You've done shows. And so once you're in maintenance mode, it's much easier to maintain. I mean, look, if you went a couple of days overboard, what do? Just go the other way for a couple of days, and so you never actually take back off again and gain a bunch of weight. But I think the reason it's really working well now is because of the intermittent fasting and the time-restricted eating and all of that, which the Ab Master back in '96, I was that guy in the video, and I was dieting very different for...
Is it still online?
Unfortunately, no.
It's too bad. We could try to put a link in there.
Yeah, I've got it on VHS still, but I got to get it somehow transferred to DVD. But anyway, so it's just a totally different mindset back then, low fat, da-da-da-da-da. And what I found back then, funny story, I remember doing the shoot and driving home thinking, Tim Hortons, grocery store, McDonald's. I mean, I was just thinking, where am I going to go? Burger King, I got to stop somewhere and eat. So, if you want to know, I still remember what I went home and ate.
What'd you have?
So I was 26 at the time, 22 years ago. So I bought a pack of hot dogs. And it's funny because I would never do this now. I could do a much better version of this. I bought a pack of hot dogs, a big thing of peanuts, and a bucket of ice cream. That was my...
That's what you wanted.
That's what, yeah.
Did you have the hot dogs with a bun or anything like that?
I think some. I think there may have been a few that, I tackled with a bun, and then I don't know why the peanuts. Oh, I know why. Probably just to put it on top of the ice cream. And
yeah, but you've always been like a weird combo eater. I know one of your dishes, ground beef and protein powder.
Yeah, that's a great one. I found that out by accident, right? It's kind of like the cauliflower.
Yeah.
Except instead of the cauliflower, it's just the ground beef.
Chocolate?
Ground beef, ground turkey, ground chicken, whatever you want. And I just dump the protein powder. Instead of dumping it on the cauliflower, I dump it on the meat and I stir it in. I'm telling you, it's, for the hardcore guys and even the semi-hardcore people, you're not going to find it too gross. I think I think you're going to like it.
You know what? And for the bodybuilders that are, doing their shows and they're just force-feeding themselves in off-season trying to gain, that might be at least one of the enjoyable meals to try. I don't know. I haven't tried it yet, so.
I tell you, I mean, if you want to gain size, it's not about eating one meal a day.
And that's just it. We're not talking about that.
Right, so we know.
Yeah.
right? We're not talking to those bodybuilders who can think we're nuts, eat one meal a day, you're crazy.
No, we're not talking to you guys.
Right, that's a different conversation. But, even those guys...
It's something that they can certainly implement strategically
100%.
in their off-season and on-season.
100%, because what we are ultimately talking about is health.
Right.
And if you enjoy better health, you will enjoy better performance.
And they're going to look better.
Exactly.
Right? So I think we'll conclude with that.
Okay.
So if anyone wants to find you and work with you, they can easily find you on Facebook, right?
Facebook, again, 22 years, I've never advertised.
No signs.
I have no sign on my door, I have no business cards. Everything's been all word of mouth. I've been profoundly fortunate. But to me, that tells me one thing, is that what I'm teaching is accurate.
Right.
Right? So I'm on Facebook. I don't know.
Or they can reach me, and then I can.
They can reach you. I don't know
if the connection. Sure.
Give my number. I don't know if you want to do that.
Yep.
Whatever it is, it is.
If they really, really need you.
If they really need me, they'll find me. But again, guys, the things you're going to hear from us when you sit with us, there are people talking about it, and lots of them, but there are people talking the exact opposite as well. And there's, like I said, 4, 5, 6 different quote-unquote experts. So who do you listen to? Well, if you want to look and be in really good shape and be in really good health, I think there's, you should look into the whole keto carnivore thing. I've yet to see the vegan, vegetarian community, be, muscular and full and aesthetically oriented. And I know that there are vegan bodybuilders and they look great, but they also have fantastic genetics. I know with myself, if I eat meat, my physique looks better than if I'm not eating meat. So those who want to be vegetarian and vegan, take the lectins out. Those who are interested in meat and low-lectin keto, I think that and the intermittent fasting, time-restricted eating, very simple, fundamental, that's where you begin. And then to that, we could add some simple supplements. The gut starts in the mouth. We want to have a very healthy mouth, and we're going to do that through a proper oral hygiene protocol. The last time I was at the dentist, I was 31, so 17 years ago. And he told me 17 years ago that within 6 months I will need a root canal and gum graft surgery. Haven't been back since. And the reason I went to him was because when I was 13, I had 4 cavities. So they put in the mercury. So I wanted them out. Took them out, and he said, "Hey, this is what I'm seeing." Okay. Fortunately,
no problems.
Who likes the dentist, right? So I dodged a couple of uncomfortable bullets by sitting in the dentist chair. But there is a protocol that works really, really well to optimize the health of your oral microbiome, and if it's well balanced, cavities just don't happen. And then the rest of your gastrointestinal tract also thrives, because it all begins in the mouth and going through the esophagus and the stomach and the 3 parts, the small intestine, the colon. If you take care of this part of your body, you're going to do unbelievably well. And there's a few simple supplements that we highly recommend. We really like apple cider vinegar. We like chlorella, chlorophyll, just some basic things that are really gut friendly. Glutamine is nice. Obviously probiotics.
Yep.
Right? A big one I think that many people overlook, and you'll have to sit with one of us for this one to get this one down, but stomach acid. Right? We need to normalize that stomach acid.
Absolutely, and so many of my clients come to me, they're on SSRIs or the antacids, and we need to completely do the opposite. But there's a definite systematic approach. They can't just do that on their own.
Well, they can, but they can't. So some people it might work great. Others could really hurt themselves.
Yeah.
So you want to be working with somebody who understands how to do this, because here's the thing. It's like a domino effect, right? So yes, from the mouth to the esophagus to the stomach, you want the domino to fall properly from the stomach into the small intestine, because if your stomach pH isn't low enough, you cannot activate the pancreas. For the pancreas to secrete the bicarbonate and the pancreatic digestive enzymes to support that next process of digestion, and then that goes to the next step. So this stomach acid is really important to knock the following dominoes down properly. And
right.
In 22 years, I've never met anybody with normal stomach acid function unless they were doing this. But guess what? If they were looking after their stomach acid, it meant they were pretty knowledgeable.
Right.
So that would mean, where would they not be?
With you.
In here.
I remember when I first saw you in a clinical setting, that was one of the first things that we fixed, and what an eye-opener experience.
Right.
And when I finally fixed my stomach, and I finally fixed the balance of my stomach acid, it was night and day difference. And to this day, my digestion is bang on.
Well, what's so interesting is if your stomach acid is underproducing stomach acid, eventually you cannot, protein will putrefy and carbohydrates will ferment, and you will create putrefacitive and fermentative gases, and they make their way up with the little stomach acid you have. Boom, burns the esophagus. Boy, touch the mic again. Heartburn. Tell your doctor, oh my God, I'm having a heart attack. No, you're not. You're just heartburn. Here, take this medication. Let's suppress symptom management. Let's suppress your pain. Well, that's great temporarily, but your GI is totally falling apart. Your microbiome is totally falling apart. You're not going to be able to metabolize and absorb your nutrients. It's really a large part of the beginning of the end. So when people come to me, we need to fix this area and give the digestive tract an ability to heal. And what heals the gut the very best is?
A gut-friendly lifestyle.
A gut-friendly lifestyle, very good, but specifically?
Meat.
Oh,
that's right.
Meat is the number one thing, and this was really interesting. I saw Dr. Sean Baker talk about this. They were talking about colostomy bags at a study. So colostomy bags, when they take out your large intestine, and you end up pooping into a bag. So they looked at these bags of people who were vegetarian, vegan, and they were really full. They looked at meat eaters, and there was almost nothing in it. And I was shocked to hear this. And the reason is because it gets absorbed in the small intestine. That's why it's such a massive, massive gut healer. So I get it. If you can't eat meat, I get it. All we are here to do is share with you what we know. The rest of it is really going to be up to you. The last thing you want to do in life, everyone's on their own journey. You don't want to force them into anything. But those who are looking for this information, whatever the percentage of this overall viewership that's going to be, you're looking for it, you found it, you get excited, you contact one of us, you start doing your own research, and you're on your way.
It's so funny because there's some aha moments right there when you're talking about digestion and the heartburn, but we couldn't even have this conversation without talking about the importance of gut health and how to normalize the gut health, because if the gut is healthy, then everything else is healthy.
Yeah, and it's not to say that that's where it ends, but that's where it begins. And so yes, we can talk about bifunctional biotransformation, in other words, liver detoxification. We can talk about mitochondrial function, get into much more specifics.
Hormones.
Absolutely. But we got to start somewhere, right? None of us came out running, right? Although a friend did tell me he went from, he never crawled. He just got up and walked. Never really heard of such a thing, but I guess
probably Usain Bolt.
I guess it exists. So the point is, we start slow when we get the fundamentals in place. Once the fundamentals are in place and you feel better, you get excited about the next step and the next step and the next step. And the steps are endless. It's just, it comes down to two things, as we've always discussed historically. It comes down to information and your ability to afford the information. So health, unfortunately, is not for everybody. It's for those who can afford it. It's very, very sad. Although, having said that, now with the fasting and the low-lectin keto carnivore lifestyle, now it's so much more affordable for so many more people. Like these containers of medical foods that are approved by the FDA for inflammation, for blood sugar, for detoxification, for all sorts of things that Metagenetics used to make, they're $100 a container, right? I remember, Dr. Rakowski, with many of his patients, they'd be paying $1,500 and $1,800 in supplementation. Well, a lot of people can't afford that, right? So now that we understand the importance of intermittent fasting, time-restricted eating, low-lectin keto carnivore, this is not going to cost you any more. In fact, it'll probably cost you less because you're eating less food.
Right.
And so you can eat more expensive food, cleaner food, organic food.
Yeah. Well, on that note, thank you very, very much.
Loved it.
Dr. Nandor. Thanks
awesome,
so much.
My brother.
And if you wouldn't mind, just hit the like button down below. Also subscribe, because I will be sharing more and more information and wonderful interviews just like this.
It's great stuff. It's if you read, I've read a number of different books on spirituality, and what really resonates is unique authors, and each author resonates with individual people. So what we're saying resonates with you, you're on your way, because you'll love what we have to say, because we believe we're telling you the truth, and we're going to show you where to look to find more fantastic information on all of this stuff. So he's going to continue bringing really good material that you'll just you'll love.
Great. So on that note, in good health and in good spirit.
In good health and in the best spirit. Thanks, brother.
Thank you.